What is the richest country? Well, that depends on what metric you base your rankings on. There's gross domestic product, or GDP, which measures all economic activity in a country. This is the metric used most often to compare how large a country's economy is. Yet, by this ranking, China would be the second richest country in the world. Now, they certainly aren't the poorest, but if you compare living standards of someone in China to a country like Switzerland, I think it's clear this metric is not optimal. What if you balance the GDP of a country by its number of people, also known as GDP per capita? This will result in a list that doesn't just favor the largest countries. Most lists of the richest countries use this metric, but it's quite flawed, because GDP measures economic activity, not how wealthy the citizens are. For example, we have a citizen who works in a car factory. When he makes a car part worth $500, he doesn't get paid $500. Yet, using GDP per capita, this would artificially inflate his income. So let's completely scrap the idea of GDP. What else can we use? Well, income. How much people in the country make. Then we need to adjust this not only into US dollars, but also to adjust for prices. You can buy a Big Mac in the US for roughly $5.69, yet that same Big Mac would cost over $7 in Uruguay. This is called purchasing power parity. So now that we have our metric, what's the richest country? Well, it's Luxembourg. Never heard of it? I can't blame you. But it's not a microstate where only 5 people live or some tax haven in the Caribbean. It's an admittedly small country in Western Europe situated between France, Germany, and Belgium, but it has over 600,000 people. So this begs the question, how did Luxembourg become so wealthy? Well, to understand how Luxembourg became rich, we need to understand how Luxembourg became, well, Luxembourg. The history of Luxembourg stretches back to the Middle Ages, where the nation started as a duchy in the Holy Roman Empire, which is basically medieval Germany. Then the Counts of Luxembourg were some of the most prominent people in the entire empire for over 100 years. But after they faced a succession crisis, they fell under the rule of Austria for the next 400 years. And after being passed around different empires for 100 years after that, they finally became fully independent in 1866. Then, after being invaded in both world wars, the already small country's economy was shattered. But Luxembourg recovered, being a founding member of NATO and the United Nations, which is pretty impressive for such a small country. And this rise was helped further by the Marshall Plan, which is a US-funded aid program to rebuild the economies of Western Europe after the Second World War. Then in the 50s, they joined the European Economic Community, which is the predecessor to the European Union, or EU. This enhanced integration into Europe was incredibly beneficial to their economy. This can be easily visualized by looking at their GDP, which doubled from 700 million to 1.4 billion in just the 10 years after 1960. Not only did this integration to Europe help their economy by enabling easy import and export of goods and services, but also direct employment in Luxembourg. Luxembourg is one of the main hubs for EU institutions, as is the Court of Justice of the European Union and the European Court of Auditors. It doesn't only have courts, however. It's also one of the locations of the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union, along with Belgium. All these European agencies need employees, which contributes to the dramatic rise of GDP and GDP per capita in Luxembourg, with rates climbing as high as 10% in 1986. That's 1% higher than China's was in the exact same year. In the 50 years after 1960, Luxembourg's GDP went from 710 million to 56 billion. So now that we know the history of Luxembourg and its economy, what does it look like today? Well, besides from jobs related to EU institutions, one of the most significant is their financial sector, with 136 different international banks with over 800 billion in deposits. Another key component of the Luxembourgish economy is steel, and they export over $1 billion of iron blocks each year. Additionally, despite its small size, Luxembourg has a healthy agricultural sector, which produces over 15 million liters of white wine. The major destinations for Luxembourgish goods are, unsurprisingly, other European Union members such as Germany, France, and Belgium. Lastly, Luxembourg has a healthy tourism market, with tourists spending over $4.4 billion a year to visit Luxembourg City and nearby castles. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, liking and subscribing would really help the channel.